At Christmas dinner, her billionaire husband held his pregnant mistress and told his wife she'd never be a mother. Then she handed him an envelope. The crystal chandeliers of the Montgomery Grand Ballroom reflected off 500 champagne glasses. As Marcus Montgomery stood at the podium, his hand possessively wrapped around another woman's waist. The woman was glowing, radiant, unmistakably pregnant, and she was not his wife. Isla Montgomery sat at table 3, her emerald dress catching the Christmas lights, watching. Her husband of 12 years hold his pregnant mistress in front of everyone who mattered. She watched him smile. She watched him lean into the microphone. And then she heard the words that would shatter her world into before and after. Marcus cleared his throat and began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. What was meant to be our annual Christmas charity celebration has become something far more significant. You see, marriage is supposed to be a partnership that produces legacy. But sometimes one partner simply cannot deliver what's needed. Isla felt every eye in the room turn toward her like weapons being loaded. Marcus continued, his voice steady and rehearsed. My wife Isla, sitting right there at table 3. She's a wonderful woman, talented, beautiful, devoted. But after 12 years of marriage, she hasn't been able to give me the one thing that matters most. She can't give me children. She can't give me an heir. She can't fulfill the most basic requirement of a Montgomery marriage. The room went silent except for the soft Christmas music still playing from hidden speakers. Someone gasped. Isla heard it clearly in the terrible quiet. And this, Marcus gestured to the pregnant woman beside him with something like pride in his voice. This is Celeste Brennan. She's carrying my daughter, my heir, the future of everything my family has built. I'm filing for divorce after Christmas so that I can marry the mother of my child and give her the legitimacy she deserves. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Whispers became exclamations, became full conversations as 500. Guests tried to process the public execution they were witnessing. But Isla didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't fall apart the way everyone expected. Instead, she stood up, smoothed down her emerald dress, walked through the crowd that parted for her like she carried something contagious. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage where her husband stood with his pregnant mistress, and she reached into her evening bag. Marcus looked at her with confusion, then understanding, then something that might have been fear. Isla pulled out a cream-colored envelope and placed it on the podium right next to the microphone. She leaned in close enough that only Marcus could hear her next words. Congratulations on your daughter, she whispered. I hope she brings you everything you deserve. Then she turned to the 500 guests and spoke into the microphone one final time. Thank you all for bearing witness tonight. I've learned something valuable in my 12 years as a Montgomery. Some men measure a woman's worth by what she can produce for them, rather than who she is. Some men are only as faithful as their options. And some legacies, she paused, looking directly at Marcus, aren't worth preserving. She set the microphone down with deliberate care, removed both wedding rings from her finger, placed them beside the envelope, and walked off that stage with her head high and her heart in ruins. Behind her, she heard Marcus open the envelope, heard his sharp intake of breath, heard the murmur ripple through the crowd as those close enough saw what the envelope contained. A medical report, dated 3 weeks earlier, confirming that Isla Montgomery was not barren, was not broken, was not incapable of having children. In fact, she was 3 months pregnant. Have you ever been betrayed by the one person who promised to protect you? Have you ever had your deepest pain exposed in front of everyone you know? Have you ever discovered that the life you built was constructed entirely on lies? If you've ever felt underestimated, undervalued, or cast aside by someone who should have cherished you, this story is for you. Hit that like button right now and subscribe to Love and Twilights with Dr. Phillips, because what you're about to hear will remind you that sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the doorway to our greatest transformation. And listen, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment right now. Tell me your city, your country, or just say I'm with you, Dr. Phillips, because we're about to go on a journey together. A journey about love and betrayal and the question that haunts us all. Can people really change? Or are some mistakes simply unforgivable? Let's find out together. This story begins not at that Christmas dinner, but 12 years earlier, when a young artist named Isla Hayes met an ambitious businessman named Marcus Montgomery at a gallery opening in Manhattan. Isla was 24 years old, fresh out of art school, displaying her work for the first time in a real gallery. She wore a dress she'd borrowed from her roommate and shoes that pinched her feet, but her eyes sparkled with dreams and possibilities. Her paintings covered one entire wall of the gallery, bold emotional pieces that explored themes of connection and isolation in modern life. Marcus was 27, already making waves in commercial real estate development, attending the gallery opening because his business partner's wife had dragged him there. He stood in front of one of Isla's paintings for 15 minutes, completely absorbed, and when she approached to introduce herself, he looked at her like she'd created something miraculous. "Tell me about this one," he said, gesturing to a painting of a woman standing at a window, half in shadow, half in light. Isla smiled. "It's about the moment before a decision, when you're standing between who you were and who you could become. That space where anything is possible but nothing is certain yet." Marcus stared at her. "I just bought a building," he said. 40 stories of glass and steel in Midtown, and every wall inside is blank and waiting for something meaningful. Would you be interested in a commission?" That was how it started. Not with romance, but with respect. Marcus hired Isla to create art for his building. They spent months in meetings, discussing themes and colors and the emotional journey he wanted people to experience when they entered his space. And somewhere between the planning meetings and the installation days, they fell in love. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Marcus showed Isla parts of the city she'd never seen, rooftop restaurants and private clubs, and the kind of luxury she'd only imagined. But he also sat on the floor of her tiny studio apartment, eating takeout Chinese food while she painted. He asked her questions about her childhood and her dreams and what made her feel most alive. He listened like her answers mattered more than anything else in the world. 6 months after they met, Marcus proposed on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunrise. He didn't have a ring yet because he wanted Isla to design it herself. He just had a question and a promise. "Isla Hayes, will you build a life with me? I promise to support your art, respect your independence, and love you exactly as you are for as long as we both live." Isla said yes, with tears streaming down her face, believing every word. They married 3 months later in a small ceremony at the gallery where they'd met. Isla wore a simple white dress. Marcus wore a suit he'd owned for years. They wrote their own vows and promised to choose each other every single day, to build a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love, to create a family that valued people over profit and connection over status. For the first 5 years, they kept those promises. Marcus's business grew exponentially. He went from developing single buildings to entire neighborhoods. His company, Montgomery Development Group, became one of the most respected names in commercial real estate. But he never let success change how he treated Isla. He came home for dinner most nights. He attended her gallery showings. He bragged about her talent to anyone who would listen. Isla's career flourished too. She became known for large-scale installations in corporate spaces, for art that made people feel something in environments designed for efficiency. She taught classes at a community center in Brooklyn. She mentored young artists. She built a life that mattered beyond just making beautiful things. They tried to have children starting in year 3. It seemed like the natural next step. They were financially stable, deeply in love, ready to expand their family. But month after month, the pregnancy tests came back negative. At first, they didn't worry. "These things take time," Isla's doctor assured them. "Just relax and let it happen naturally." But after 2 years of trying, relaxing wasn't working. They started fertility testing in year 5 of their marriage. Both of them went through extensive medical evaluations. The tests were invasive and expensive and emotionally exhausting. And every single test came back the same way. No clear explanation for their difficulty conceiving. Both of them appeared medically capable of having children. The doctors used words like unexplained infertility and suggested they keep trying, maybe with assistance. They tried intrauterine insemination 3 times. Each attempt cost thousands of dollars and came with hormone treatments that made Isla sick and emotional. Each attempt failed. They discussed in vitro fertilization, but the cost was astronomical, and the success rate wasn't guaranteed. Marcus's business was doing well, but they weren't billionaires yet. They were comfortable, not wealthy. The financial strain was real, and somewhere in all the medical appointments and failed attempts and mounting pressure, something shifted in their marriage. Marcus started working later, coming home after Isla was already asleep, taking business trips that lasted longer than necessary. He stopped asking about her art, stopped attending her gallery showings, stopped seeing her as anything except the woman who couldn't give him children. Isla felt herself becoming invisible in her own marriage. She tried talking to Marcus about it, tried suggesting marriage counseling, tried everything she could think of to reconnect with the man she'd married. But he was already gone, even though he still lived in their apartment. In year 10 of their marriage, everything changed again. Marcus's grandfather died and left him a fortune, not just money, but holdings, properties, investments worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Overnight, Marcus Montgomery went from successful businessman to billionaire heir. And with that inheritance came expectations. The Montgomery family was old money, the kind that traced their lineage back generations and measured worth by legacy. Marcus's grandmother, Eleanor Montgomery, was a formidable woman who'd buried 2 husbands and outlasted countless rivals. She summoned Marcus and Isla to the family estate in Connecticut 1 month after the inheritance was finalized. The estate was exactly what you'd imagine. Sprawling grounds, a mansion that looked like it belonged in a period, drama, staff who moved silently through halls polished to a shine. Eleanor sat in a formal living room that probably cost more than most people. A's houses, and she looked at Isla like she was evaluating livestock. "Marcus, darling," Eleanor began, ignoring Isla completely. "Now that you've accepted your grandfather's legacy, we need to discuss your responsibilities to the family name. The Montgomery line has continued unbroken for 7 generations. Your cousins have all produced heirs. You're the last of your generation to fulfill this obligation." Isla felt Marcus tense beside her. "Grandmother, we've been trying," Marcus said quietly. "These things take time." Eleanor's eyes finally shifted to Isla, cold and assessing. "How long have you been married?" 12 years next month," Isla answered, keeping her voice steady. 12 years, Eleanor repeated, and the words sounded like a judgment. "My dear, at a certain point, trying becomes accepting failure. Marcus needs an heir. If you cannot provide one, perhaps you should consider whether you're truly the right partner for a Montgomery man." The words hung in the air like poison. Isla stood up, her hands shaking with rage. "With all due respect, Mrs. Montgomery, your grandson married me for love, not for breeding purposes. We're partners, not a business arrangement." Eleanor smiled, thin and cold. "How naive. Love is a luxury, my dear. Legacy is a responsibility. And in families like ours, responsibility always comes first." They left the estate that night, with Marcus silent and brooding beside her in the car. Isla tried to talk to him about what his grandmother had said. Tried to remind him that they were more than their ability to produce children. But Marcus stared out the window and said nothing at all. That was 2 years ago. 2 years of Marcus pulling further and further away. 2 years of Isla feeling like a failure in her own marriage. 2 years of living in an increasingly luxurious penthouse that felt more like a prison than a home. Because Marcus's business exploded after the inheritance, he leveraged his grandfather's connections and capital to become one of the most powerful developers in the country. He bought buildings in every major city. He started a venture capital firm. He launched a private equity fund. He became the kind of billionaire whose name appeared in Forbes and whose opinion shaped markets. And Isla became the billionaire's wife, not an artist anymore, not a teacher or mentor, just an accessory who attended charity galas and smiled for photographs and felt herself disappearing a little more each day. She stopped teaching her community classes because Marcus said it didn't fit their new social position. She stopped taking commissions because Marcus's schedule was too demanding to accommodate her work. She stopped painting altogether because what was the point when no one saw her as an artist anymore? Her entire identity became Mrs. Marcus Montgomery, the woman who couldn't give her billionaire husband an heir, the woman who was failing at the one job that mattered in families like the Montgomerys. And then, 3 months before that Christmas dinner, something changed. Isla woke up feeling nauseous. She'd felt this way before during hormone treatments, so she didn't think much of it. But the nausea continued for days, then weeks. She was exhausted all the time. Her breasts were tender. She recognized the symptoms, but didn't dare hope. They hadn't been trying to conceive for over a year. Marcus barely touched her anymore. He slept in his office most nights, claiming he had work to finish. When he was home, he was distant and cold. Their marriage existed on paper only. But 3 months ago, there'd been one night, one rare evening when Marcus came home early and seemed almost like the man she'd married. They'd had wine with dinner. They'd talked about something other than his business, and they'd ended up in bed together for the first time in months. Isla hadn't thought anything would come of it. One night, after years of trying, didn't seem significant. But her period didn't come, and the nausea got worse. And finally, alone in their penthouse bathroom while Marcus was on a business trip, Isla took a pregnancy test. 2 lines, clear and unmistakable. She took 3 more tests, all positive. She made an appointment with her doctor and went alone, not telling Marcus, because she needed to be absolutely sure before she got his hopes up, or her own. The doctor confirmed it with blood work and an ultrasound. Isla was approximately 8 weeks pregnant. Everything looked healthy. Her due date would be in early August. The doctor handed her a medical report documenting everything. Proof that she wasn't broken. Proof that she could conceive. Proof that their years of struggle had finally resulted in the baby they'd wanted for so long. Isla sat in her car in the medical center parking lot, staring at the report, trying to figure out how to tell Marcus. Part of her wanted to run straight to his office and share the news immediately. But another part of her hesitated. Their marriage was barely hanging on. Marcus had been so distant lately. So cold. So focused on business that he barely seemed to remember she existed. Would a baby fix what was broken between them? Or would it just complicate an already deteriorating relationship? She decided to wait for the perfect moment. Christmas was coming. The Montgomery family always hosted a massive charity dinner on Christmas Eve. 500 guests, black tie, the kind of event that got covered in society pages. It was the biggest night of the Montgomery social calendar. Isla would announce her pregnancy there, in front of Marcus's family and friends and all the people who'd watched her fail for years. She would prove that she wasn't broken, that their marriage wasn't over, that they could still have everything they dreamed about when they first fell in love. She had the medical report put into a beautiful cream-colored envelope. She planned what she would say. She imagined Marcus's face when he realized they were finally going to be parents. She had no idea that Marcus had his own announcement planned for that Christmas dinner, an announcement that would destroy everything. The 3 weeks between Isla's doctor's appointment and Christmas Eve were strange and surreal. Isla was carrying Marcus's child, growing their future inside her body, but Marcus had no idea. He continued being distant and distracted. He traveled constantly. He barely spoke to her when he was home. Isla tried to connect with him several times. She suggested they have dinner together, just the 2 of them. She asked about his day and his work, and tried to show interest in the things that consumed his attention. But Marcus deflected every attempt at intimacy. "I'm busy right now," he'd say. "We'll talk later." But later never came. Isla's sister Rachel called her a week before Christmas with concern in her voice. "Isla, honey, I need to tell you something. I was at a restaurant downtown last night, and I saw Marcus. He was having dinner with a woman, a young woman, blonde, pretty, very pregnant. They were holding hands across the table." Isla's blood went cold. "What?" Rachel's voice softened. "I'm so sorry. I debated telling you, but I thought you should know. They looked very comfortable together, very familiar. This wasn't a business dinner." Isla thanked her sister and hung up, her hands shaking. She told herself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a client. Maybe it was someone from work. Maybe it was completely innocent. But deep down, she knew. She'd known for months that something was wrong. She'd just been too afraid to confront it. She hired a private investigator. It felt dramatic and desperate, but she needed to know the truth before the Christmas dinner, before she announced her pregnancy, before she made a fool of herself. The investigator came back within 48 hours, with a file that made Isla physically ill. Marcus had been having an affair for 6 months with a woman named Celeste Brennan, 28 years old, worked in marketing for one of Montgomery Development Group's subsidiary companies. She was 4 months pregnant. Marcus had been paying for her medical care, her apartment, everything. The investigator included photographs. Marcus and Celeste having dinner, entering her apartment building together, leaving a doctor's office with Celeste's hand on her pregnant belly and Marcus's arm around her shoulders. There were text messages too. The investigator had gotten access to Celeste's phone somehow. Messages between her and Marcus that made everything clear. Marcus had told Celeste that his marriage was over, that Isla couldn't have children, that he was going to divorce her after the holidays, that he wanted to marry Celeste and legitimize their baby. Isla sat in her penthouse reading these messages while her own baby grew inside her, and she felt something inside her chest simply shatter. Marcus didn't just cheat on her. He'd replaced her, found someone younger, someone fertile, someone who could give him what he wanted. And he'd been planning to humiliate her by announcing it publicly at their Christmas charity dinner. She could have confronted him immediately, could have thrown the affair in his face, could have told him about her own pregnancy and forced him to deal with the consequences of his choices. But Isla was tired of fighting for a man who'd already left her, tired of begging for scraps of attention from someone who saw her as a failure, tired of being treated like an obligation instead of a partner. So, she made a different plan. She would let Marcus make his announcement at the Christmas dinner, would let him humiliate her in front of 500 people, would let him show everyone exactly who he'd become, and then she would leave that envelope on the podium and disappear. She spent the week before Christmas preparing. She rented a cottage in a small coastal town called Brinewood that she'd found online. Remote, quiet, the kind of place where Montgomery money and influence wouldn't reach. She transferred money from accounts Marcus didn't know she had, money she'd saved from her art career before they married, money that was hers alone. She packed boxes with things that mattered: photographs, journals, art supplies, clothes. She arranged for a moving company to pick everything up the day after Christmas and deliver it to Brinewood. She closed social media accounts. She informed her doctor that she'd be transferring care to a new provider. She planned her escape with meticulous care, making sure that by the time Marcus realized what he'd lost, she'd be gone so completely that even his resources couldn't find her. And on Christmas Eve, Isla put on her emerald dress and her diamond jewelry and played the role of Billionaire's wife one final time. The Montgomery Grand Ballroom looked like something from a winter fairy tale. White roses and evergreen garlands covered every surface. Crystal icicles hung from the chandeliers. Snow machines created gentle flurries that melted before touching the ground. The Christmas tree in the center of the room was 20 feet tall and decorated with ornaments that cost more than most people's cars. 500 guests arrived in designer gowns and custom tuxedos. The guest list read like a who's who of New York society: business titans, political figures, celebrities, old money families. Everyone who mattered was there to celebrate Christmas with the Montgomerys and contribute to their annual charity auction. Isla had planned this entire event. She'd chosen the theme, selected the caterer, approved the decorations, organized the auction items. She'd spent months making sure every detail was perfect. And now she stood in the ballroom watching people admire her work, knowing it was the last thing she'd ever do as Isla Montgomery. Marcus arrived separately, which should have been Isla's first warning. He swept into the ballroom with his business partners, all of them laughing about something. He barely glanced at Isla, didn't compliment her dress, didn't acknowledge all the work she'd done to make this event happen. He just moved through the crowd shaking hands and making small talk like she didn't exist. Isla found herself standing near the orchestra, a glass of champagne in her hand that she couldn't drink because of the baby. Her baby, the secret growing inside her that should have been the happiest news of their marriage. She pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling nothing yet, but knowing everything had changed. In 6 months, she'd meet her daughter. She'd somehow known from the first positive test that it would be a girl. A little girl who would grow up knowing she was wanted and loved for exactly who she was, not what she could provide. The speeches began after dinner. Eleanor Montgomery went first, talking about family legacy and charitable giving and the importance of maintaining traditions. Several board members from the Montgomery Foundation spoke about the children's programs they funded. And then Marcus took the stage. Isla watched him climb the steps, watched him adjust the microphone, watched him scan the crowd with practiced confidence. She saw his eyes land on someone near the back of the room, saw him gesture, saw a blonde woman begin making her way through the crowd. Celeste Brennan wore a silver gown that draped perfectly over her pregnant belly. She moved with the careful grace of someone in her second trimester, one hand protectively cradling her stomach. She climbed the steps to join Marcus at the podium, and he wrapped his arm around her waist with casual possessiveness. The room went very quiet. People were confused, trying to understand what was happening. Why was there a pregnant woman on stage with Marcus Montgomery? Where was his wife? Isla felt 500 pairs of eyes searching for her. She stood very still near the orchestra, watching her marriage end in real time. Marcus began to speak, and the words that came out of his mouth were somehow worse than anything Isla had imagined. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. What was meant to be our annual Christmas charity celebration has become something far more significant. You see, marriage is supposed to be a partnership that produces legacy, but sometimes one partner simply cannot deliver what's needed. He paused, letting the words sink in. Isla watched confusion shift to understanding on people's faces, watched them turn to look at her with pity and judgment. My wife, Isla, sitting right there at table 3. She's a wonderful woman, talented, beautiful, devoted. But after 12 years of marriage, she hasn't been able to give me the one thing that matters most. She can't give me children. She can't give me an heir. She can't fulfill the most basic requirement of a Montgomery marriage. The room erupted in whispers. Someone actually gasped. Isla heard Eleanor Montgomery say something approving to the person beside her. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident. And this is Celeste Brennan. She's carrying my daughter. My heir, the future of everything my family has built. I'm filing for divorce after Christmas so that I can marry the mother of my child and give her the legitimacy she deserves. I'm making this announcement publicly because I believe in transparency, in honesty, in doing what's right for my family's future, even when it's difficult. He looked directly at Isla then, and his expression was almost apologetic. Almost. I hope everyone will understand that sometimes we have to make impossible choices. That legacy matters. That continuing the family name is more important than holding on to something that isn't working. The ballroom was chaos now. People talking over each other, phones appearing to capture the moment. Eleanor Montgomery nodding with satisfaction like this had all been planned, which, Isla realized, it probably had been. This wasn't just Marcus's decision. This was the whole family choosing legacy over humanity. Celeste stood beside Marcus with a practiced expression of sympathy, like she felt bad for Isla, but was resigned to being the other woman. She placed her hand on her pregnant belly in a gesture that drew everyone's attention to what she had that Isla apparently didn't. And Isla felt something inside her snap, not break, not shatter, snap into place. Clarity, cold, perfect clarity. She set down her champagne glass and began walking toward the stage. The crowd parted for her, everyone watching to see what the humiliated wife would do. Would she cry? Would she make a scene? Would she beg Marcus to reconsider? Isla climbed the 3 steps to the stage in her emerald dress and her borrowed dignity. She walked right up to Marcus, who looked at her with something like wariness, like he wasn't sure what she was capable of in this moment. Smart man. Isla reached for the microphone, and after a brief hesitation, Marcus handed it to her. The ballroom went silent, 500 people holding their collective breath to hear what she would say. Isla looked out at the sea of faces, people she'd known for years, people she'd worked with on charity committees, people she'd considered friends. They were all waiting to watch her fall apart. She smiled instead. Thank you all for bearing witness tonight. Her voice came out steady and strong. I've learned something valuable in my 12 years as a Montgomery. I've learned that some men measure a woman's worth by what she can produce for them rather than who she is. That loyalty means nothing when legacy is involved. That love is conditional when ambition is infinite. She turned to look at Celeste, really look at her. The other woman's confident expression faltered slightly under Isla's direct gaze. Congratulations on your daughter. I hope she grows up learning that her worth isn't measured by what she can give to others. I hope she never feels like a failure for not meeting someone else's expectations. I hope you teach her that she's valuable exactly as she is." Then Isla turned back to Marcus. She looked at the man she'd loved for 12 years. The man she'd supported through struggling years and celebrated with during success. The man she'd believed in when no one else did. The man who was throwing her away because she couldn't produce an heir on his timeline. "I've been a good wife to you, Marcus. I supported your dreams when you had nothing but ambition. I built a home for us when all we could afford was a studio apartment. I stood by you through every challenge, and I did all of it because I loved you. Not because of what you could give me, not because of your potential, just because of who you were." Her voice cracked slightly, the only sign of emotion she allowed herself. "But apparently who you were isn't who you are anymore. So I'm going to do what you should have done months ago if you had any integrity. I'm going to end this with honesty." She reached into her evening bag, the small emerald clutch that matched her dress. She pulled out the cream-colored envelope that contained the medical report. The report that proved she wasn't broken. The report that confirmed she was pregnant. The report that would have been the happiest news of their marriage if Marcus hadn't already destroyed everything. She placed the envelope on the podium right beside the microphone. "This is for you. Maybe open it later. Maybe it won't matter anymore, but at least you'll know the truth." Then Isla removed her rings, the engagement ring with the diamond she'd designed herself when they were young and in love, the wedding band engraved with the vows Marcus had broken. She set them both beside the envelope. She looked at Marcus one final time. His expression had shifted from confidence to confusion to something that might have been fear. He reached for the envelope, but Isla spoke before he could open it. "Some legacies aren't worth preserving, Marcus. I hope you figure that out before it's too late." Then she walked off that stage, down the 3 steps, through the crowd that parted in shocked silence, past the Christmas tree and the ice sculptures and the white roses, out of the Montgomery Grand Ballroom and into the cold December night. Behind her, she heard Marcus open the envelope, heard his sharp intake of breath, heard someone ask what was in it, heard the rising murmur of confusion and speculation. But Isla didn't stop walking. She got into her car, started the engine, and drove away from her marriage while Christmas lights blurred past her windows. She drove for 3 hours straight, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her mind numb with shock and grief and something that might have been relief. She didn't cry, couldn't cry yet. The tears would come later. Right now she just needed to drive. By the time she reached Brinewood, it was past midnight. Christmas Day had arrived, but Isla felt like everything worth celebrating had died at that podium. The cottage she'd rented was small and dark and waiting for her. She let herself in with the key the property manager had left under the mat, turned on lights that revealed empty rooms and hardwood floors and windows that overlooked the ocean. This was home now. This anonymous cottage in a town where no one knew her name or her failure or her humiliation. This was where she'd raise her daughter, where she'd rebuild her life from scratch, where she'd become someone new. Isla walked to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress she'd had delivered the week before. And finally, alone in the darkness with the sound of waves crashing in the distance, she let herself cry. She cried for her marriage, for the man she'd loved who'd turned into someone she didn't recognize, for 12 years of devotion that meant nothing in the end, for the baby growing inside her who would never know her father, for the life she'd built that had crumbled so completely. She cried until she had nothing left, until her eyes were swollen and her throat was raw and exhaustion pulled her under. And when she woke on Christmas morning, Isla Hayes, formerly Montgomery, placed her hand on her stomach and made a promise to the daughter she was carrying. "You will never feel worthless. You will never be measured by what you can produce. You will know every single day that you are loved for exactly who you are. I promise you that. I promise." Now listen, if you're feeling Isla's pain right now, if this story is hitting you in places you didn't expect, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button. Hit subscribe, because what happens next is going to show you that the worst betrayals can become doorways to the most beautiful transformations. And comment below. Tell me, What would you have done in Isla's position? Would you have left that envelope? Would you have disappeared? Or would you have fought for your marriage? I want to know. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from, or just say I'm with you, Dr. Phillips, because we're only getting started. While Isla was crying herself to sleep in that cottage in Brinewood, Marcus Montgomery was experiencing his own kind of devastation. After Isla walked out of the ballroom, he'd opened the envelope with shaking hands. The medical report inside was dated 3 weeks earlier, from Isla's fertility specialist. The Dr. Marcus had sent her 2 years ago when they were still trying to conceive. The report confirmed that Isla Montgomery showed no signs of infertility. Her reproductive system was perfectly healthy. There was no medical reason she couldn't conceive. In fact, the report concluded with a note that made Marcus's blood turn to ice. Patient is currently 8 weeks pregnant. All indicators normal. Estimated due date, August 7th. Congratulations. Marcus read those words 3 times before they penetrated. Isla was pregnant, had been pregnant for 2 months, had been carrying his child while he was planning to divorce her for another woman's baby. He looked up to find 500 people staring at him, waiting to see his reaction. Celeste stood beside him, trying to read the report over his shoulder. "Marcus, what is it?" she asked, but her voice sounded nervous, like she already knew this was bad. Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't process what he'd just learned, couldn't reconcile the fact that he'd just publicly humiliated his wife for being barren when she was actually pregnant with his child. Someone in the crowd, a business partner named Richard Chen, called out, "What does the report say, Montgomery?" Marcus folded the paper with shaking hands and put it back in the envelope. He looked out at the crowd, at his grandmother's expectant face, at the phones recording every moment, and he understood that he just made the biggest mistake of his life in the most public way possible. "The dinner is over," he said into the microphone. "Thank you all for coming. Please enjoy the rest of your evening." Then he walked off the stage, leaving Celeste standing there alone, and went to find his wife. But Isla was already gone. He called her phone 17 times. Every call went straight to voicemail. He drove to their penthouse, but she wasn't there. He checked with building security. They told him Mrs. Montgomery had left with several suitcases an hour before the dinner started. Marcus spent Christmas Day trying to find his wife. He called her sister, her friends, her former art students. No one knew where she was, or if they knew, they weren't telling him. He hired a private investigator on December 2006, gave them every piece of information he had about Isla, but she'd vanished completely. Her phone was disconnected. Her email bounced back. Her social media accounts were deleted. She'd withdrawn substantial amounts of money from accounts he didn't even know she had. She'd planned this escape carefully, and she'd executed it perfectly. In the days after Christmas, Marcus's life unraveled with stunning speed. The video of his announcement at the Christmas dinner went viral. Someone had recorded the whole thing and posted it online. Within 48 hours, it had millions of views. The comments were brutal. "Imagine being this cruel to your wife in public." He called her barren in front of 500 people, and she was literally pregnant. "This man is a monster." His business partners started distancing themselves. Investors pulled funding from projects. Clients canceled contracts. The Montgomery name, which had meant power and prestige for generations, became associated with cruelty and betrayal. And then, 1 week after Christmas, Marcus got the results from a medical test he'd requested months earlier but had forgotten about. His own fertility analysis, the one he'd ordered when he and Isla were still trying to conceive. The results were devastating. Marcus had a condition called oligospermia, low sperm count. Not impossible to father children, but significantly more difficult than normal. The specialist's note was clear. Natural conception would be challenging without treatment. Patient advised to seek fertility interventions. Marcus sat in his office reading this report and understanding the full scope of his failure. He'd blamed Isla for their inability to conceive when the problem had been at least partially his. He'd called her broken when he was the one who needed medical intervention. He'd humiliated her publicly for a failure that was his own. And then there was Celeste. Marcus hadn't paid much attention to the timeline of her pregnancy. She'd told him she was 4 months along, that the baby was his, and he'd believed her because he wanted to believe. Because having a child, any child, seemed like the solution to all his problems. But now he started asking questions, started demanding proof, started investigating. Celeste resisted at first. She told him he was being paranoid, that the stress of the situation was making him irrational, that of course the baby was his. But Marcus was a billionaire with unlimited resources and a desperate need to know the truth. He hired investigators. He had Celeste followed, and within 2 weeks he had evidence that destroyed any remaining illusions. Celeste had been seeing another man when she and Marcus started their affair, a man named Derek Hayes who worked in construction and had no money and no prospects, a man she'd left the moment Marcus showed interest in her. The investigators got phone records, text messages between Celeste and Derek where she explicitly stated that she wasn't sure whose baby she was carrying but hoped it was Marcus's because he was rich and Derek was broke. Marcus confronted Celeste in mid-January with all the evidence. She tried to deny it at first. Then she tried to justify it. Finally, she admitted the truth. "I don't know if the baby is yours," she said, her practiced sympathy replaced by cold calculation. "The timing works for either of you. But I chose you, Marcus. I chose your money and your name and your life. Doesn't that count for something?" Marcus arranged for a paternity test. Celeste fought him on it, threatened legal action, tried to leverage their relationship. But Marcus was done being manipulated. The test results came back in early February. 0% probability of paternity. The baby Celeste was carrying wasn't his. The heir he'd destroyed his marriage to claim didn't share his DNA. The future he'd publicly announced at that Christmas dinner was based entirely on lies. Marcus could have felt vindicated, could have used this information to prove he'd been deceived, could have gone public with Celeste's betrayal and shifted some of the blame away from himself. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered, because even if Celeste's baby had been his, even if he'd been the victim of her deception, he'd still done the unforgivable. He'd humiliated his pregnant wife in front of 500 people. He'd called her broken when she was carrying his child. He'd prioritized legacy over love and destroyed the one person who'd loved him unconditionally. And now she was gone. Completely, thoroughly gone. Taking their baby with her. Marcus sat in his penthouse in February, surrounded by divorce papers and paternity tests and the wreckage of his reputation, and understood that he'd lost everything that actually mattered while chasing things that meant nothing at all. His business would recover eventually. His reputation might even heal with time and good PR. But Isla and their child? That loss was permanent. That damage couldn't be undone. He kept calling her disconnected number, kept leaving voicemails that would never be heard, kept apologizing to empty air for mistakes that couldn't be forgiven. And he wondered if somewhere out there, Isla was listening. If she knew about Celeste's betrayal, if she felt any satisfaction in his suffering. But most of all, he wondered about the baby, his daughter, probably, due in August, growing inside Isla's body while he sat alone in a penthouse that felt like a tomb. Would Isla tell their child about him? Would she raise their daughter to hate him? Would he ever get to meet the baby he'd wanted so desperately that he destroyed everything trying to find her? The questions haunted him, but the answers were 3 hours north in a coastal town called Brinewood, where Isla Hayes was building a new life from the ashes of her old one, and Marcus Montgomery had no idea that everything he'd lost was within reach if he was willing to do something he'd never done before. Give up his pride, give up his money, give up everything that made him powerful, and become someone worthy of the family he'd destroyed. But that revelation was still months away. For now, Marcus sat in his failure, and Isla sat in her freedom, and an ocean of hurt lay between them that seemed impossible to cross. February in Brinewood was cold and gray and relentlessly beautiful. The ocean crashed against rocky shores with a violence that matched Isla's internal chaos. She'd been in the cottage for 6 weeks, and her body was changing in ways that made her pregnancy impossible to ignore. The morning sickness that had started as mild nausea in December had evolved into something that kept her close to the bathroom for hours each day. She couldn't keep food down before noon. The smell of coffee, which she'd always loved, made her physically ill. She was exhausted all the time, sleeping 10, 12, 14 hours a day, and still waking up tired. But she was also happy, genuinely, surprisingly happy, in a way she hadn't been in years. The cottage had become her sanctuary. She'd unpacked the boxes the movers delivered and filled the empty rooms with pieces of her old life, photographs from before Marcus, from when she was just Isla Hayes the artist. Her painting supplies, untouched for years. Books she'd collected, journals she'd kept since college. She'd also bought new things, a rocking chair for the nursery, baby clothes in soft yellows and greens because she didn't know the sex yet and didn't want to assume, a crib she'd found at a second-hand store in town. She was building a life for herself and her baby, and she was doing it with her own money and her own choices. Brinewood itself was exactly what Isla needed. The town had maybe 3,000 permanent residents, most of them connected to fishing or tourism, or the small arts community that had developed over the years. People here didn't care about billionaires or scandals or Manhattan society. They cared about whether you showed up when someone needed help, whether you contributed to the community, whether you were genuine. Isla met Margaret Cross her first week in town. Margaret owned the Lighthouse Inn and seemed to know everything about everyone in Brinewood. She was in her 60s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. And she'd shown up at Isla's cottage with a casserole and questions. "You're the new girl renting the Hendricks place," Margaret had said, walking into Isla's cottage without waiting for an invitation. "Saw you at the grocery store yesterday, looking green around the gills. When are you due?" Isla had been so startled by the directness that she'd answered honestly. August, early August. Margaret had nodded like this confirmed something she already knew. Running from something or toward something? Both, Isla had admitted. Good. Running from the right things is just as important as running toward them. You need anything, you come find me at the inn. And I mean anything. Doctor, lawyer, friend, someone to hold your hair while you're sick. I've seen it all and helped with most of it. And just like that, Isla had her first friend in Brinewood. Margaret introduced her to Dr. Rachel Kim, who ran the women's clinic in town. Rachel was younger than Isla, maybe 30, with a warm smile and a no-nonsense approach to medicine that Isla appreciated immediately. "Let me guess," Rachel had said at Isla's first appointment. "You're starting over, new town, no partner visible, medical records being transferred from somewhere else. You want privacy, you want good care, and you don't want judgment." Isla had nodded, surprised again by how easily these Brinewood women read her. "You'll get all three here." Rachel had pulled out her stethoscope and blood pressure cuff. "Your baby doesn't care about your past, and neither do I. Let's make sure you're both healthy, and we'll go from there." The appointment had revealed that despite the terrible morning sickness and exhaustion, Isla's pregnancy was progressing perfectly normally. The baby's heartbeat was strong and steady. Isla's blood pressure was good. Everything looked exactly as it should. Rachel had printed out an ultrasound image, the first picture of the baby Isla was carrying. At 12 weeks, it didn't look like much, just a blob with a visible head and tiny limb buds. But Isla had stared at that image for an hour after leaving the clinic, tears streaming down her face. This was her daughter, her child, the baby that Marcus had wanted so desperately but would never know, the future that Isla was building alone. She'd taped the ultrasound image to her bedroom mirror, where she could see it every morning when she woke up. A reminder of why she'd left, a reminder of what she was fighting for. The weeks passed in a rhythm that became comfortable. Isla woke late, nauseous and tired. She forced herself to eat crackers and ginger tea. She walked along the beach when the morning sickness subsided, bundled in layers against the cold. She painted in the afternoons, rediscovering the joy she'd lost during her marriage. Her art changed during those months. Before, she'd painted controlled, beautiful pieces designed for corporate spaces. Now she painted raw emotion. Waves crashing, storms building, a woman standing alone on a cliff with her hair whipping in the wind, a baby's hand reaching for light. She didn't plan to sell these paintings. They were therapy, a way of processing everything she'd lost and everything she was becoming. But Margaret saw them when she stopped by one day with more food, and she'd stood in Isla's living room, staring at the canvases with tears in her eyes. "These are incredible," Margaret had said quietly. These are real. You're a real artist, Isla, not someone painting pretty pictures for rich people's lobbies. An actual artist. The compliment had meant more than Margaret probably knew. Isla had spent so many years being Mrs. Marcus Montgomery that she'd forgotten she was anything else. Reclaiming her identity as an artist felt like reclaiming herself. In March, as Isla entered her second trimester, the morning sickness finally eased. She woke up one day and realized she was hungry instead of nauseous. Actually hungry, craving things instead of just trying not to vomit. She went to the local diner and ordered pancakes and eggs and bacon, and she ate every bite. The waitress, a woman named Lorraine with kind eyes and a warm smile, had brought her extra bacon without being asked. "You're eating for two now, honey. Don't be shy about it." It was the first time anyone in Brinewood had openly acknowledged Isla's pregnancy. And something about the casual kindness of it made Isla's eyes fill with tears. Lorraine had sat down across from her without asking. "Hormones are a beast, aren't they? I cried at a commercial for paper towels when I was pregnant with my daughter. Something about a puppy, and I just lost it completely." Isla had laughed through her tears. "I cried yesterday because the sunset was pretty." "Sounds about right." Lorraine had patted her hand. "You're doing good, sweetheart. Being pregnant alone is hard, but you're doing it. You're showing up every day and taking care of that baby. That makes you stronger than most." Those small moments of kindness from near strangers were what kept Isla going through the lonely stretches. The times when she woke up at 3 a.m. and reached for Marcus before remembering he wasn't there and never would be again. The times when she felt the baby move for the first time and had no one to share the moment with. The times when fear about the future threatened to overwhelm her. The baby's first movements came in mid-April, just little flutters that Isla might have mistaken for gas if she hadn't been paying attention. She was sitting on her porch, watching the ocean when she felt it, a gentle rolling sensation, like bubbles popping inside her belly. She'd pressed her hand to her stomach and felt it again. Her daughter, moving and growing and alive. "Hi, baby," Isla had whispered. "I'm your mama. I know this isn't how I planned things, but I promise you're going to be so loved. You're going to grow up knowing you matter, knowing you're wanted, knowing you're enough exactly as you are." She'd started talking to the baby after that, narrating her days, telling stories about her own childhood, making promises about the future. It helped with the loneliness, made her feel less alone, even when the cottage was empty. In May, Isla started teaching art classes at the Brinewood Community Center. Margaret had suggested it, mentioning that the center was looking for instructors, and that Isla's talent was being wasted if she kept it to herself. The class was small at first, just 5 students, mostly retirees looking for hobbies. But Isla loved it, loved teaching again, loved helping people discover their own creativity, loved being useful in a way that had nothing to do with being someone's wife. The class grew quickly. Word spread that there was a real artist teaching at the community center, someone who displayed work in Manhattan galleries. By June, Isla had 15 students and a waiting list. She met more people through teaching. Susan Walsh, the midwife who would eventually help deliver Aria. Thomas and Patricia Hendricks, the elderly couple who owned Isla's cottage and became like surrogate grandparents. Father Miguel from the local church, who attended her class despite having no artistic talent because he said it, helped him pray. She was building community, building a life, becoming Isla Hayes again instead of Mrs. Marcus Montgomery. Her body changed as the pregnancy progressed. By June, she had a definite bump that she couldn't hide anymore. She bought maternity clothes at a consignment shop in town, comfortable dresses and stretchy pants that accommodated her growing belly. She stopped wearing makeup most days, let her hair air dry into its natural waves instead of straightening it the way Marcus had preferred. She looked at herself in the mirror one morning in late June and barely recognized the woman staring back. Pregnant, glowing, dressed simply, no designer labels or expensive jewelry. Just Isla, just herself, and she liked who she was becoming. But there were hard days too, days when the weight of being pregnant and alone crashed over her like the waves outside her window. Days when she wondered if she'd made the right choice leaving Marcus. Days when fear about single motherhood made it hard to breathe. On one particularly difficult night in July, Isla sat on her bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, her back aching and her feet swollen, and her mind spiraling with anxiety. How was she going to do this alone? How was she going to raise a child without help? What if something went wrong during delivery? What if she was a terrible mother? What if her daughter grew up resenting her for keeping Marcus away? She'd pulled out her phone. Marcus's number still saved, even though it was disconnected. She'd almost called him, almost reached out, almost asked for help. But then she'd felt the baby kick. Hard, like her daughter was reminding her why she'd left in the first place. And Isla had put the phone away and made herself a promise. She would do this alone. She would be enough for her daughter. She would build a life so full of love that her child would never feel the absence of a father who hadn't deserved them anyway. July passed in a blur of final preparations. Isla set up the nursery in the cottage's smallest bedroom, painted the walls a soft lavender, assembled the second-hand crib with help from Thomas Hendricks, who spent 3 hours cursing at unclear instructions while his wife Patricia made tea and laughed at him, washed tiny clothes and folded them into drawers, stocked up on diapers and bottles and all the supplies the baby books said she'd need. She packed a hospital bag, made a birth plan with Susan the midwife, who would attend the delivery at the regional hospital 40 minutes away, arranged for Margaret to be her birth partner since she had no family nearby and wasn't ready to tell her sister Rachel where she was. And she waited, enormous and uncomfortable and excited and terrified. The due date was August 7th. Isla's daughter had other plans. The contractions started on August 2nd, a full week early. Isla was at the community center teaching her art class when the first one hit, a tightening across her belly that made her gasp and grab the table for support. "Are you okay?" one of her students had asked, concerned. "Fine," Isla had managed. "Just Braxton Hicks, I think. False labor. Nothing to worry about." But 20 minutes later, another contraction came. Stronger this time. Unmistakable. Patricia Hendricks, who was in the class, had taken one look at Isla's face and started packing up supplies. "That's not false labor, dear. That's the real thing. We're getting you to the hospital." The drive to the regional hospital was the longest 40 minutes of Isla's life. The contractions were coming every 10 minutes by the time they arrived. Patricia stayed with her through admission, held her hand while nurses asked questions and checked her progress. 4 centimeters dilated, moving quickly for a first baby. They'd admitted her immediately. Susan the midwife arrived within an hour. Margaret showed up not long after, having driven like a madwoman when Patricia called her. And then it was just the 3 of them in a hospital room. Isla and 2 women she'd known for less than a year, preparing to bring a baby into the world. The labor was long and hard and more painful than anything Isla had imagined. The contractions built and built until they were coming on top of each other with no break in between. She begged for an epidural. Got one. It helped for a while, then wore off too soon. She was in labor for 14 hours. 14 hours of pain and fear and exhaustion. 14 hours of wondering if she could do this, if she was strong enough, if her body would know what to do. Margaret held one hand. Susan held the other. They talked her through every contraction, reminded her to breathe, told her she was doing great even when she felt like she was dying. And then, at 3:47 in the morning on August 3rd, after one final impossible push, Isla's daughter was born. The baby came out screaming, angry and alive and perfect. The doctor placed her on Isla's chest, and Isla looked down at this tiny human she'd created. This daughter who had dark hair matted to her head, and eyes squeezed shut, and fists waving at the injustice of being born. "Hi, baby," Isla whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hi, Aria. I'm your mama. I've been waiting so long to meet you, Aria." The name had come to Isla in a dream a month earlier. It meant air, song, lioness, depending on the origin. It felt right. Felt like this tiny, fierce girl who'd survived the wreckage of Isla's marriage and arrived a week early because she was ready. Aria Quinn Hayes. No Montgomery. No connection to the father who'd rejected them both before knowing they existed. The first weeks with Aria were the hardest of Isla's life. Harder than the public humiliation. Harder than the escape. Harder than pregnancy alone. Because newborns were relentless. and Isla was exhausted in ways she hadn't known were possible. Arya needed to eat every 2 hours. Day and night, every 2 hours, Isla woke to screaming and fumbled with bottles, or tried to breastfeed through cracked nipples and tears of frustration. She was so tired she hallucinated. So overwhelmed she sometimes sat on the bathroom floor crying while Arya cried in her bassinet. But she was also more in love than she'd ever been. She would hold Arya at 3 in the morning, both of them exhausted and covered in spit-up, and feel her heart expand in ways she didn't know were possible. This was her daughter, her child, the best thing she'd ever done. Margaret came by every day for the first 2 weeks, held Arya while Isla showered, or slept, or just sat in silence, brought food that Isla could eat with one hand, showed her how to swaddle and burp and interpret different types of cries. Susan checked on them regularly, made sure Isla was healing properly, made sure Arya was gaining weight and hitting her milestones, made sure neither of them had any complications. The community rallied around them. Patricia brought casseroles. Thomas fixed a squeaky door that was waking the baby. Lorraine from the diner dropped off coffee and breakfast sandwiches. Father Miguel blessed Arya at the cottage when Isla was too tired to bring her to church. These near strangers became Isla's family, became Arya's village, became the support system that made single motherhood survivable. Isla documented everything in a journal. First smile, first time sleeping more than 2 hours straight. First bath. She took hundreds of photographs, wrote letters to Arya about their days together, created memories that didn't include Marcus because Marcus had forfeited his right to these moments. And she was happy, genuinely happy despite the exhaustion and the fear and the loneliness. She'd built a life that mattered. She'd created a family. She was enough. By the time Arya was 3 months old, Isla had found her rhythm. She understood her daughter's cries and needs. She could function on broken sleep. She'd started painting again, in stolen moments while Arya napped. She'd even resumed teaching her art class, bringing Arya with her in a carrier. Life was good. Hard, but good. Full of love and purpose and meaning. And then, on a cold November morning when Arya was exactly 3 months old, Marcus Montgomery walked into the Brinewood diner and saw his daughter for the first time. Now, before we get to that moment, we need to understand what was happening in Marcus's world. Because while Isla was building a beautiful life in Brinewood, Marcus was watching everything he'd ever built crumble into dust. The Christmas dinner scandal had gone viral in ways Marcus couldn't contain. The video had been viewed millions of times. News outlets picked up the story. Think pieces were written about toxic masculinity and billionaire entitlement. His face became a meme, a symbol of everything wrong with wealthy men. Montgomery Development Group lost 3 major contracts in January. Investors pulled funding. Board members resigned. His stock price dropped 40%. His business partners, the ones who'd sat at that Christmas dinner and watched him humiliate Isla, suddenly had concerns about his judgment and leadership. His grandmother Eleanor died in February, her final words to Marcus a disappointment that cut deeper than any business loss. "You had everything," she'd whispered from her hospital bed, "and you threw it away for pride and foolishness. Your grandfather would be ashamed." The Montgomery family, what was left of it, fractured. Cousins took sides. Some supported Marcus, saying he'd been deceived by Celeste and deserved sympathy. Others condemned him for how he'd treated Isla, saying that, regardless of Celeste's lies, his public humiliation of his pregnant wife was unforgivable. The family business empire built over generations started to collapse. Properties were sold, holdings were liquidated. The Montgomery name, which had meant power and prestige, became associated with scandal and failure, and Marcus sat in his penthouse watching it all fall apart, understanding that he deserved every bit of it. Celeste had disappeared after the paternity test results came back. She'd taken the settlement money Marcus's lawyers had foolishly given her and vanished. Last he'd heard, she was in California with Derek, the actual father of her baby. They'd had a son in March. Marcus had seen the birth announcement on social media, Derek beaming in the photo while Celeste held their baby. The baby that was supposed to be Marcus's heir, the future he'd destroyed his marriage to claim. All of it based on lies He'd been too arrogant to question, but none of that mattered compared to what haunted Marcus every single day. Isla and their daughter. If Isla's due date was early August, she'd probably given birth by now. Somewhere out there, Marcus had a child. A daughter, probably. A little girl who was 4 months old, maybe 5, and he'd never met her, never held her, didn't even know her name. He'd hired 7 different private investigators. All of them came back with the same result. Isla Montgomery had vanished completely. She'd sold her car 3 states away. She'd withdrawn money from accounts he didn't know existed. She'd disappeared with the kind of thoroughness that suggested professional help or extremely careful planning. One investigator found a lead in late October, a small recurring donation to a women's clinic in Brinewood, Maine from an account in Isla's maiden name. The donation had started in February and continued monthly. It wasn't much, just $500 each time, but it was consistent, and it was connected to prenatal care. The investigator had been cautious. This might be her, or it might be a false trail. Brinewood is small, remote, the kind of place someone might go to disappear. But I can't confirm she's actually there without going myself, and if she is there, the town might protect her. Small communities tend to close ranks around their own. Marcus had been on the road within 2 hours. The drive to Brinewood took longer than expected. The town was nearly 4 hours north of Portland, tucked into a rugged section of coast that saw harsh winters and rough seas. The roads were winding and treacherous. The GPS lost signal twice, but Marcus kept driving, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his mind racing with what he'd say if he found Isla, how he'd apologize, how he'd explain, how he'd beg for a chance to know his daughter. He reached Brinewood just as the sun was setting, turning the ocean into liquid gold. The town was exactly as the investigator had described. Small, weathered, beautiful in a harsh way. Fishing boats lined the docks. Houses clung to cliff sides. Everything looked worn by salt and wind and time. He checked into the Lighthouse Inn, the only accommodation available. The owner, a steel-haired woman who introduced herself as Margaret Cross, looked at him with immediate suspicion. "Just passing through?" she'd asked, her tone suggesting she didn't believe him. "Looking for someone, actually," Marcus had admitted. "A woman who might have moved here earlier this year. Dark hair, brown eyes, about 30 years old. She might have been pregnant when she arrived." Margaret's expression had gone cold. "We respect privacy in Brinewood, Mr. Montgomery." Marcus Montgomery. Recognition had flashed in Margaret's eyes, followed by something that looked like anger. "I see. Well, Mr. Montgomery, Brinewood is a small town. If someone came here to escape something, to build a new life, we tend to support that. We don't tend to help people who might disrupt the peace they've found. So she is here," Marcus had said, his heart pounding. "I didn't say that." Margaret had handed him a room key. "Breakfast is at 8. Check-out is at 11. I'd suggest you don't stay longer than necessary." Marcus had barely slept that night. He'd lain in the unfamiliar bed listening to the ocean and wondering if Isla was somewhere in this town, if his daughter was sleeping in a nearby house, if he'd driven 4 hours only to be stonewalled by an entire community. The next morning, he'd gone to the diner Lorraine's place according to the faded sign. He'd ordered coffee and sat by the window, watching the town wake up. Fishermen heading to the docks, shop owners opening their businesses, a few tourists bundled against the November cold. And then the door had opened, and Isla had walked in. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, wavy, and natural instead of styled. She wore jeans and a wool sweater and practical boots. No makeup, no jewelry, no designer labels. She looked younger somehow, lighter, happy. And in her arms, strapped to her chest in a baby carrier, was a little girl. Marcus had frozen, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. The baby was tiny, dressed in a pink snowsuit with a knit hat covering her head. All Marcus could see was her face. Round cheeks, rosebud mouth, eyes that were closed in sleep. His daughter, he knew it with absolute certainty. That was his child. Isla had been laughing at something the waitress said, completely unaware that Marcus was there. She'd walked to a booth near the back, sliding in carefully so as not to wake the baby. She'd ordered something Marcus couldn't hear. And Marcus had sat there paralyzed, trying to figure out what to do. He could approach her, could walk over to that booth and say her name, could see her reaction, force a confrontation with her, could walk over to that booth and say her name, could see her reaction, force a confrontation, demand to be part of his daughter's life. Or he could wait, could observe, could try to understand what Isla's life looked like now before he disrupted it. He'd chosen to wait, which was probably the first unselfish decision he'd made in years. He'd watched Isla eat breakfast while the baby slept against her chest, watched her chat easily with the waitress and with other people who stopped by her booth, watched her pull out a sketchbook and draw one-handed while she drank her coffee. She looked content, peaceful, like she belonged here, and Marcus had understood, sitting in that diner, that Isla had built a life without him. A good life, a life where she was valued and connected and happy, a life that didn't need him to be complete. The realization had hurt more than anything that came before. Isla had left the diner after about an hour, the baby still asleep in her carrier. Marcus had watched through the window as she walked down Main Street, stopping to talk to an elderly couple, waving at someone across the street. She moved through Brinewood like she'd lived there for years instead of months. Margaret had appeared at Marcus's table with the coffee pot. She'd refilled his cup without asking, and sat down across from him. "That's what happiness looks like," she'd said quietly. "In case you've forgotten, she's built a good life here. That baby is loved by this entire town. They have community and support and peace. You showing up threatens all of that." "I'm her father," Marcus had said. "That's my daughter. Biology doesn't make you a father. Showing up makes you a father. Being there makes you a father. And you weren't there when it mattered." Margaret's voice had been sharp. "Isla told me what you did. The whole town knows. You called her barren in front of 500 people while she was carrying your child. You chose another woman's baby over your own wife. You don't get to walk in here now and claim rights you abandoned." The words had hit like physical blows. Marcus had known he deserved them, but hearing them spoken so bluntly made it impossible to hide from what he'd done. "What's her name?" he'd asked. "My daughter. What's her name?" Margaret had studied him for a long moment. "Aria. Her name is Aria Quinn Hayes. She's 3 months old. She's healthy and happy and surrounded by people who love her. And Isla is the best mother I've ever seen. She's doing it all alone, and she's doing it beautifully. I want to meet her." Marcus's voice had broken. "I want to know my daughter. That's not your choice anymore. That's Isla's choice. And given what you did to her, I'd say your chances aren't good." Margaret had stood up. "My advice? Get in your fancy car and drive back to whatever city you came from. Let them have their peace. You've already done enough damage." But Marcus hadn't left. He couldn't leave. He'd seen his daughter, and that brief glimpse had changed everything. He'd spent the next 3 days in Brinewood, watching from a distance, trying to work up the courage to approach Isla, trying to figure out what to say, trying to understand if there was any path forward that didn't involve him forcing his way into a life that clearly didn't want or need him. He'd seen Isla at the community center, teaching an art class with Aria sleeping in a portable crib nearby. He'd seen her at the grocery store, shopping one-handed while the baby slept in her carrier. He'd seen her on the beach, walking slowly with the baby bundled against the cold. And everywhere she went, people helped her, held doors, carried her groceries, stopped to admire the baby. Isla was part of this community in ways Marcus had never been part of any community. She belonged. On his 4th day in Brinewood, Marcus had finally approached her. She'd been leaving the women's clinic where she apparently volunteered, and he'd been waiting by her car because he was out of other options. Isla. She'd stopped walking, had gone completely still, hadn't turned around. "Isla, please, I just want to talk." She'd finally turned to face him, and the expression on her face had been worse than anger. It had been nothing. Blank, like he was a stranger she was being polite to out of obligation. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" "I found out about the baby, about Aria, and I needed to see you, needed to see her, needed to know you were both okay." "We're fine." Isla's voice had been ice. "We're more than fine. We're happy. and we're not interested in whatever you're selling. I'm not selling anything. I just want a chance to explain, a chance to apologize, a chance to be part of Arya's life. Isla had laughed, sharp and bitter. You want a chance? You had 12 years of chances, Marcus. You had our entire marriage to choose me, to believe in us, to wait for the family we were trying to build. And instead, you called me broken in front of 500 people while I was carrying your child. You don't get chances anymore. I was wrong. Marcus had stepped closer, desperate. I was so wrong about everything. Celeste lied to me. The baby wasn't mine. Everything I destroyed our marriage for was based on lies, and I was too arrogant to see it. I know, Isla had said calmly. I hired investigators months ago. I knew Celeste was lying before Arya was even born. I knew you were walking into a trap, and I didn't warn you. The admission had shocked Marcus into silence. Isla had continued, her voice steady. I wanted you to feel what I felt. I wanted you to invest everything in that baby, to rebuild your identity around being a father, and then have it ripped away. I wanted you to experience a fraction of the betrayal I experienced, and I'm not proud of that. But watching you destroy yourself was the closest thing to justice I could imagine. So you knew. You knew I was being deceived, and you let it happen. Yes, and I'd do it again. Isla had shifted Arya in her arms. The baby was starting to wake up, making small sounds. Because what you did to me at that Christmas dinner was unforgivable, Marcus. You didn't just end our marriage. You tried to destroy who I was. You tried to make me believe I was worthless because my body didn't perform on your timeline. She'd looked down at Arya, who was now fully awake, and staring up at her mother with wide gray eyes. Eyes that looked exactly like Marcus's. But you were wrong. I'm not broken. I'm not worthless. I built a life here that matters. I have a daughter who will grow up knowing she's valuable for who she is, not what she can produce. And I have peace. Finally, after 12 years of trying to be enough for you, I have peace. Can I meet her? Marcus had asked, his voice breaking. Can I just meet Arya? Please, Isla, I'm begging you. Isla had looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression had softened just slightly. She'd adjusted the baby in her arms so Marcus could see her better. This is Arya Quinn Hayes. She's 3 months old. She likes music and being warm, and when I read to her, she's starting to smile. She sleeps better than most newborns. She's the best thing I've ever done. Arya had stared at Marcus with solemn gray eyes, her tiny fist waving in the air. And Marcus had felt something in his chest crack wide open. She's beautiful, he'd whispered. She's perfect. Yes, she is. And she deserves better than a father who shows up out of guilt. She deserves someone who chooses her every single day. Someone who's there for the hard parts, not just the convenient parts. Someone who values her for who she is instead of what she represents. Isla had started walking toward her car. I need to go. Arya's hungry, and it's past her feeding time. Wait. Marcus had grabbed her arm gently, then released it when she flinched. Please, tell me what I need to do. Tell me how to fix this. I'll do anything. Isla had opened her car door and secured Arya in the car seat she'd installed in the back. When she'd turned back to Marcus, there had been tears in her eyes. If you really want what's best for us, if you truly care about Arya's well-being, you'll get in your car and leave. You'll let us have the life we've built. You'll understand that some mistakes are too big to fix and some doors, once closed, need to stay that way. She'd gotten in her car and driven away, leaving Marcus standing in the clinic parking lot with his heart in ruins. That conversation had happened 6 months ago, and Marcus Montgomery had made a decision that day that changed everything. He didn't leave Brinewood. If you're still with me, if you're feeling the weight of this story, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that like. Because what happens next is going to show you what real transformation looks like. And I promise you, it's not what you expect. Comment below. Tell me, should Marcus leave like Isla asked? Or does he have the right to stay and fight for his daughter? I want to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. Or just say I'm with you, Dr. Phillips. Because Marcus's journey from billionaire to broken man to something entirely new is about to begin. And it's going to test everything we think we know about redemption. Let's continue. instead of returning to his penthouse and his empire, and everything that made him Marcus Montgomery. Billionaire developer, Marcus checked out of the Lighthouse Inn and looked for work in Brinewood. The only job available to someone with no fishing experience was on Captain Jonas Fletcher's boat. Jonas was a weathered man in his 60s who'd spent his entire life on the ocean. He looked at Marcus's expensive clothes and soft hands and laughed outright. "You want to work on my boat? Boy, you've never done a day of real work in your life. What makes you think you can handle this?" "I need to stay in Brinewood," Marcus had said honestly. "I need to prove I can show up consistently for something that matters. I'll do any work you're willing to assign. I'll work for whatever you think I'm worth. I just need a chance." Jonas had studied him with eyes that had seen everything. "You're the one who hurt Isla. The whole town knows the story. You're the billionaire who called his pregnant wife barren." "Yes," Marcus had admitted. "That's me, and I'm trying to become someone different, someone worthy of the family I destroyed." Jonas had spit into the ocean. "I'll give you 1 week. You show up at 4 in the morning every day. You do exactly what I tell you. You work until the job's done, no matter how long it takes. And I'll pay you minimum wage because that's all you're worth to me right now. You quit or complain or ask for special treatment. You're done. Understood?" Understood. The first week of fishing work nearly killed Marcus. He woke at 3:30 in the morning to be at the docks by 4. The work was brutal, hauling nets that weighed more than he did, gutting fish until his hands were raw and bleeding, scrubbing decks in freezing temperatures, working 12, 14, 16-hour days. His body rebelled. His back screamed. His hands blistered and bled. His muscles ached in ways he didn't know were possible. He'd been a weekend gym goer in his old life, maintaining an acceptable level of fitness for appearance sake. This was different. This was labor that broke you down and rebuilt you. But he showed up. Every morning at 4, Marcus was on that dock, waiting for Jonas. And every night, no matter how late they returned, Marcus finished his tasks before leaving. The crew treated him with open contempt at first. They knew who he was, knew what he'd done. They gave him the worst jobs deliberately, testing whether he'd quit. They mocked his technique, his weakness, his inability to keep up. Marcus took it all without complaint, because he understood that he deserved every bit of it. By the end of the first week, Jonas had grudgingly admitted that Marcus could stay on. Not because he was good at the work, he wasn't, but because he showed up and didn't quit and seemed willing to learn. Marcus found a tiny apartment above the bait shop, 1 room with a hot plate, a mattress on the floor, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. It cost him most of his minimum wage earnings, leaving almost nothing for food or other expenses. He sold his expensive watch to pay the first month's rent, traded his designer clothes for practical work gear from the secondhand store, learned to budget his meager earnings to cover food and housing with nothing left over. The billionaire who'd owned properties in every major city now lived in a 1-room apartment that smelled like fish and squeaked when the wind blew. And he was grateful for it, because every day in Brinewood was a day he could see Aria, even if it was from a distance. He'd catch glimpses of Isla and the baby around town. At the grocery store, community center, walking on the beach, he never approached them, never tried to force interaction, just watched his daughter grow from afar and ached with everything he'd missed. Aria started smiling at 4 months. Marcus saw it happen at the diner. Isla had been talking to Lorraine when Aria suddenly broke into a huge gummy grin, and Marcus had watched from across the room with tears in his eyes, his daughter's first smile, and he wasn't part of it. The months passed in a rhythm of work and exhaustion and slow transformation. Marcus's hands calloused. His body grew strong from constant labor. His entire existence became about proving he could show up consistently, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. He started fixing things around town without being asked. The broken gate at the community center appeared repaired one Saturday morning. The loose railing on Mrs. Patterson's porch was secured. The playground equipment that had been deemed unsafe was fixed and reinforced. Marcus did this work in his limited free time, using skills he learned from YouTube videos and trial and error. He never left notes or took credit. just quietly made himself useful. The town noticed. Slowly, incrementally, Brinewood's hostility began to shift into wary acceptance. People still didn't trust him, but they acknowledged that he was trying. Lorraine started serving him coffee the way he liked it, without him having to specify. The owner of the hardware store stopped overcharging him. Jonas gave him slightly less terrible tasks on the boat, but Isla still wouldn't speak to him beyond basic politeness. She'd nod if they passed on the street, would acknowledge his presence with cold courtesy, but she made it clear that his presence in Brinewood changed nothing between them. Marcus accepted this as deserved consequence. He wasn't here to win Isla back. He was here to prove he was capable of sustained commitment, to show through actions instead of words that he was becoming someone different. 8 months into his exile in Brinewood, on a warm June day when Arya was nearly a year old, Marcus was repairing a fence outside the clinic when he heard Isla's voice raised in alarm. "Arya, no!" He'd looked up to see the baby, who was apparently walking now, toddling toward the street, moving fast on unsteady legs, heading directly into traffic. Marcus had dropped his tools and run. He'd scooped up Arya just before she reached the road, his heart pounding, his hands shaking with adrenaline. Arya had looked up at him with solemn gray eyes, her tiny hand patting his face. "Dada," she'd said, the word unclear but unmistakable, and Marcus's entire world had stopped. Isla had appeared seconds later, frantic with fear. She'd taken Arya from Marcus's arms without a word, checking her daughter over for any injury. For just a moment, they'd stood close enough that Marcus could smell Isla's shampoo, could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could remember what it felt like to know her completely. "Thank you," Isla had whispered, her voice cracking. "Always," Marcus had said. "I'll always keep her safe. Both of you." Isla had looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her expression had shifted. She'd seen his calloused hands and weathered face, seen the humble clothes and humble existence, seen that he'd given up everything to be near them. "Why did you stay?" she'd asked quietly. "Because this is where my family is," Marcus had answered honestly. "I already lost a year of Arya's life by choosing wrong. I'm not losing another day. Even if all I ever get is seeing her from a distance, that's more than I deserve and more important than anything I left behind." Isla hadn't responded. She'd just held Arya close and walked back into the clinic. But the next day, when Marcus was eating lunch alone on the dock, she'd sat down beside him with careful distance between them. "We need to talk about Arya, not about us, not about the past, just about her." "Okay," Marcus had said, his heart pounding. "She's walking now, talking a little. She's curious and fearless, and it terrifies me. I'm doing this alone, and I'm terrified I'm going to mess her up somehow." "You're an amazing mother," Marcus had said. "I've watched you with her. The way you're patient with her moods, the way you make everything a learning opportunity, the way you love her. She's lucky to have you." Isla had been quiet for a moment. "She called you Dada yesterday. She's never done that before. I don't know where she learned the word, maybe from other kids at the community center, but she looked at you and said it, and I saw your face." Marcus had felt tears threatening. "I know I don't have the right to that title. I know I haven't earned it." But hearing it, even just that once, it meant everything. They'd sat in silence, watching fishing boats return to the harbor. Then Isla had spoken again. "There's a birthday party next month. Arya's turning 1. I've been planning it for weeks. Just a small thing at the cottage with people from town who've helped us. I'm telling you this because if you want to come, you can. Just for an hour. Just to be there. No promises beyond that. Just 1 hour on her birthday." Marcus had looked at her, unable to believe what he was hearing. "Yes, thank you. I'll be there." Isla had stood up then, preparing to leave. "I can't forgive you yet. I don't know if I ever can. What you did at that Christmas dinner broke something inside me that might not heal. But Arya deserves to know her father if her father is someone worth knowing. You've spent a year proving you can show up. So show up to her birthday, and we'll see what happens after that." She'd walked away, leaving Marcus sitting on that dock with hope flooding through him for the first time in over a year. The birthday party was exactly what Isla had described. Small, intimate, held at her cottage with maybe 15 people. Margaret and Lorraine and Jonas and Father Miguel, and all the Brinewood residents who'd helped Isla survive single motherhood. Marcus had arrived exactly on time, carrying a gift he'd made himself. A small wooden sailboat he'd carved from driftwood and sanded smooth. It had taken him 3 weeks of evenings to complete, working by lamplight in his tiny apartment. It wasn't perfect, but it was made with love. Arya had been wearing a pink dress and a party hat that kept sliding over her eyes. She'd squealed when she saw the sailboat, immediately trying to put it in her mouth. Everyone had laughed, and Marcus had felt something in his chest expand. This was his daughter, walking and talking and laughing, and he was here. Finally, after missing so much, he was here. He'd stayed for exactly an hour, as promised. Had sat quietly in a corner while Arya tore into presents and smashed her face into birthday cake. Had helped clean up when the party started winding down, even though Isla hadn't asked him to. And when he was leaving, Arya had toddled over to him and raised her arms. Up, she demanded. Up, Dada. Marcus had looked at Isla for permission. She'd hesitated, then nodded. He'd picked up his daughter for only the second time in her life, held her small body against his chest, felt her head rest on his shoulder, breathed in the smell of her, baby shampoo and frosting, and something uniquely Arya. "Bye-bye," Arya had said, waving at the remaining guests. "Bye-bye, sweetheart," Marcus had whispered, his voice breaking. "Happy birthday." He'd handed her back to Isla and left the cottage before his tears became obvious. He'd made it to his apartment before falling apart completely, sitting on his mattress and crying for everything he'd missed and everything he might still have a chance to build. That birthday party became the first of many small interactions. Isla started allowing Marcus brief supervised visits. Wednesday afternoons, he could come to the cottage for an hour. Arya would show him her toys. He'd read her books. They'd play in the small backyard, while Isla watched from the porch. Marcus never pushed for more, never demanded rights or tried to force a timeline, just showed up every Wednesday and proved through consistent presence that he was reliable. He learned his daughter's preferences. She loved books about animals. She hated peas. She had a stuffed rabbit named Whiskers that she carried everywhere. She was fearless on the playground, but terrified of loud noises. He documented everything in a journal, trying to make up for the year he'd missed, writing down each new word, each milestone, each moment of progress. Arya started calling him Dada consistently, started looking for him on Wednesday afternoons, started running to him when he arrived and crying when he had to leave. And Isla watched it all with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something softer than the ice she'd shown him at the beginning. 2 years passed this way. Marcus working on the fishing boat, living in his tiny apartment, spending Wednesday afternoons with Arya, slowly, incrementally, earning back something he'd thought was lost forever. His businesses in New York had been liquidated by court order after he'd stopped managing them. The Montgomery empire was gone, distributed among creditors and distant relatives. Marcus had nothing left of his old life except a modest savings account and the clothes on his back. And he didn't care, because he had Wednesday afternoons with his daughter. He had the grudging respect of a town that had every reason to hate him. He had a life built on honest work instead of financial manipulation. He'd become someone different, someone better, someone who finally understood what actually mattered. On a cold February evening, 3 years after that disastrous Christmas dinner, Marcus was reading to Arya at Isla's cottage. The little girl was curled against his side, drowsy and warm, while he navigated a picture book about a lost penguin finding his family. Isla sat across the room, ostensibly working on grant proposals for her art program, but actually watching them together, watching Marcus's infinite patience with Arya's endless questions, watching how gently he tucked her hair behind her ear when it fell in her face, watching the absolute devotion in his expression when he looked at their daughter. When Arya finally fell asleep mid-sentence, Marcus had carried her to her room with practiced care, tucked her into bed surrounded by stuffed animals, kissed her forehead, whispered the same thing he whispered every visit. "I love you more than all the stars. I'm so sorry I wasn't there from the beginning, but I'm here now. Always." He'd returned to the living room to find Isla crying silently, tears streaming down her face. Marcus had frozen, terrified he'd done something wrong, ready to apologize and leave if she needed space. "I forgive you," Isla had said, her voice breaking, and Marcus's world had tilted on its axis. "I forgive you." The words hung in the air of Isla's cottage, like something sacred, like a prayer or a promise or a benediction. Marcus stood frozen in the living room, unable to process what he'd just heard, unable to believe that after 3 years of penance, after 1,000 Wednesday afternoons proving himself, after becoming someone completely different, Isla was offering him the one thing he'd stopped believing he deserved. He crossed the room without thinking and knelt in front of her chair, not touching her, not presuming anything, just close enough that she could see his face, could see the tears streaming down his cheeks, could see that her words had broken him open in the best possible way. "You don't have to forgive me," he said, his voice raw. "You don't owe me anything. What I did to you at that Christmas dinner, what I did to us, I'll never deserve forgiveness for that." Isla reached out with trembling hands and cupped his face. "I know what you did to me, Marcus. I lived through it. I carried our daughter while you were planning to marry someone else. I gave birth alone. I spent 2 years raising Arya by myself, terrified you'd find us and try to take her away. I know exactly what you did." Her thumbs brushed away his tears. "But I also know what you've done since. I've watched you transform yourself, watched you work jobs that destroyed your body, watched you live in poverty when you could have gone back to your empire, watched you earn the respect of a town that hated you, watched you love our daughter with a patience and consistency I didn't think you were capable of." She pulled him closer, their foreheads nearly touching. "The man I married would never have done any of that. He was ambitious and driven and good in many ways, but he was also entitled and arrogant and incapable of the kind of humility you've shown. You're not him anymore, and I'm tired of punishing you for who you used to be when you've worked so hard to become someone different." Marcus couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He just knelt there while Isla held his face and spoke words he'd dreamed of hearing, but never truly believed would come. "I'm not saying everything is fixed," she continued. "I'm not saying we go back to how things were. We can't. That marriage is dead, and trying to resurrect it would be a mistake. But maybe we can build something new, something built on truth instead of illusions, something earned instead of assumed." She pulled back slightly to look at him directly. "I don't want to co-parent from separate houses anymore. I don't want scheduled Wednesday visits and careful boundaries. I want to try building a real family. Not what we had before, but something different. Something stronger because it survived being completely destroyed." "What are you saying?" Marcus managed to ask. "I'm saying you can move in here, into the cottage. You'll sleep in the guest room at first, because I'm not ready for more than that yet. But you can be here every day. You can be part of Arya's routine. You can be her father in all the ways that matter, not just one afternoon a week." Isla took a shaky breath. "And we can try to be partners again, try to rebuild trust, try to see if the people we've become can love each other the way the people we were couldn't. No guarantees, no promises that everything will work out. Just trying." Marcus pulled her into his arms then, and Isla let him. They held each other in that small cottage living room, both crying, both terrified, both choosing to risk their hearts one more time. "Yes," Marcus whispered against her hair. "Yes to all of it. I'll follow your lead completely, whatever timeline you need, whatever boundaries you set. I'll show up every day and prove that this transformation is real and permanent." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, breathing together, beginning something new. Marcus moved into Isla's cottage the following week. He brought almost nothing with him because he owned almost nothing. His clothes fit in one duffel bag. His possessions, a few books, his journal, the tools he'd accumulated, filled 2 boxes. 3 years of living in radical simplicity meant he had nothing to clutter the new life he was building. The guest room was small, barely bigger than the apartment he was leaving, but it had a window that overlooked the ocean and a door that connected to the hallway where his daughter slept. It felt like a palace. Arya was ecstatic about the new arrangement. She was 3 years old now, verbal and opinionated and endlessly curious, and having her Dada in the house all the time, instead of just Wednesday afternoons, was the best thing that had ever happened to her. "Dada, wake up," she'd yell, bursting into his room at dawn. "Breakfast time." "Mama, making pancakes." Marcus would stumble out of bed, exhausted from another long day on Jonas's boat, and follow his daughter to the kitchen, where Isla would be standing at the stove in her pajamas, her hair messy from sleep, making pancakes shaped like animals. Those first weeks of living together were awkward and beautiful in equal measure. They had to negotiate everything: who made breakfast, who did dishes, how to split the household responsibilities, when Arya's bedtime was, how to handle tantrums and teaching moments. They had to learn each other again, not as the people they'd been during their marriage, but as the people they'd become. Marcus was no longer the ambitious billionaire. Isla was no longer the accommodating wife. They were both different, shaped by loss and transformation. They fought sometimes, real arguments that left them both frustrated and exhausted. About parenting decisions, about money. Marcus was still working on the fishing boat making minimum wage, and Isla's art teaching didn't pay much. About how to handle Arya's questions about why Dada hadn't always lived with them. But they also laughed. Marcus would tell stories about disasters on the fishing boat, about the time he'd fallen overboard in full gear and Jonas had to fish him out. Isla would share art class chaos, children who painted everything including themselves, elderly students who turned still life exercises into abstract masterpieces. They built routines together. Marcus woke early for the fishing boat. Isla got Arya ready for her community center play group. They'd have dinner together every night, all three of them at the small kitchen table. Then bath time, story time, tucking Arya into bed with her stuffed rabbit and her sailboat nightlight. And after Arya was asleep, Marcus and Isla would sit on the porch watching the ocean, sometimes talking about their days, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence, slowly rebuilding the intimacy that had been destroyed 3 years earlier. 3 months into the new arrangement, Isla suggested they go to counseling together. Not couples therapy exactly, but sessions with a trauma specialist who could help them process what they'd been through and build healthier patterns going forward. Dr. Sarah Chen had an office in Portland, which meant driving an hour each way for weekly sessions. But it was worth it. Dr. Chen didn't let them avoid the hard topics. She made them talk about the Christmas dinner in detail, made Marcus articulate exactly what he'd been thinking when he humiliated Isla, made Isla explain why she'd chosen to let Marcus destroy himself instead of warning him about Celeste's deception. Those sessions were brutal. They both cried. They both got angry. They both had to confront parts of themselves they'd rather ignore. But the sessions also gave them tools, ways to communicate when they were triggered, ways to express hurt without attacking, ways to rebuild trust in incremental steps. "You're both dealing with significant trauma," Dr. Chen explained during one session. "Marcus, you destroyed your own life through arrogance and poor judgment, and you're carrying enormous guilt about that. Isla, you were publicly humiliated while pregnant and vulnerable, and you're carrying fear that it could happen again. Neither of you can just forget those experiences. You have to integrate them into your new relationship." "So, how do we do that?" Isla had asked. "You practice. Every single day, you practice choosing each other. Practice being vulnerable. Practice trusting, even when it's scary. Practice forgiveness, not as a one-time declaration, but as a daily decision." And that's what they did. They practiced. 6 months into living together, something shifted. Isla invited Marcus into her bedroom. Not for sex, not yet, but just to sleep beside each other, to remember what it felt like to share a space, to begin rebuilding physical intimacy in the most basic way. "Is this okay?" she'd asked, her voice uncertain. "I'm not ready for everything, but I miss this. I miss falling asleep next to someone I trust." "It's more than okay," Marcus had answered honestly. "It's everything." They'd lain in the darkness side by side, not touching at first. Then Isla had reached for his hand, and they'd fallen asleep, holding hands like teenagers. Those nights became regular. Marcus would move from the guest room to Isla's room after Arya was asleep. They'd talk in the darkness about their fears and hopes, about Arya's latest accomplishments, about the future they were carefully building. And gradually, over weeks and months, the intimacy deepened. Tentative kisses, careful embraces, rediscovering each other's bodies like they were new territory instead of familiar ground. The first time they made love again, nearly a year after Marcus moved into the cottage, Isla cried through the entire experience, not from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming emotion of letting herself be that vulnerable with someone who'd hurt her so deeply. "I'm scared," she'd whispered against Marcus's chest afterward. "I'm terrified of trusting you this much again. Terrified that I'm making a mistake." "I'm scared too," Marcus had admitted. "Terrified I'll mess this up somehow. That I'll let you down. That I'm not strong enough to be who you need. Then we'll be scared together." Isla had pulled him closer. "And we'll keep choosing this anyway." On a warm summer evening 2 years after Marcus moved into the cottage, 5 years after that disastrous Christmas dinner, Marcus proposed to Isla for the second time. There was no ring, no elaborate plan. Just the two of them sitting on the porch after putting Arya to bed, watching the sun set over the ocean. "Marry me," Marcus had said quietly. Isla had turned to look at him, surprised. "We're already married. Technically, we never actually finalized the divorce, I know, but that marriage was based on who we thought we were supposed to be. I want to marry you again, as the people we actually are. I want to stand up in front of everyone who matters and promise to choose you every single day. For real this time." Understanding what those words actually mean, Isla had been quiet for a long moment, processing. What would be different? Everything. Marcus had taken her hand. No expensive wedding, no performing for society, no expectations about who we're supposed to be. Just us and Arya and the community that helped us survive. Just honest vows about building a life that matters. Isla had looked out at the ocean, considering. Then she'd turned back to Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Ask me properly." Marcus had slid off the porch chair and knelt in front of her. Right there in his work clothes, with calloused hands and a weathered face and nothing to offer except himself. "Isla Hayes, will you marry me again? Not because of what I can give you or what you can give me. Not because of legacy or expectation or duty, but because over the last 5 years, you've taught me what love actually means. You've shown me that transformation is possible. You've given me a second chance I didn't deserve, and you've loved me into becoming someone worthy of it." He'd paused, his voice breaking. "I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise I'll never mess up or hurt you or make mistakes. But I can promise that I'll show up every single day and choose you and Arya. That I'll value who you are over what you can give me. That I'll spend the rest of my life earning the trust you're giving me. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband in truth this time, not just on paper?" Isla had pulled him up and kissed him with tears streaming down both their faces. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you again. Because you're right. Everything is different now. We're different, and I want to celebrate that. Want to acknowledge that we died and came back to life as something new." They'd married on the beach in Brinewood on a cool September morning. The wedding was everything their first wedding hadn't been. Small, intimate, authentic. Just 50 people, all of them from Brinewood, all of them witnesses to the transformation that had brought Marcus and Isla back together. Arya was 5 years old and took her role as flower girl very seriously. She wore a yellow dress and scattered petals with grave concentration, then stood between her parents during the ceremony. Margaret officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose. Jonas stood as Marcus's best man. Lorraine was Isla's matron of honor. The community that had protected Isla and doubted Marcus and eventually accepted them both bore witness to their recommitment. The vows they wrote were nothing like the pretty words they'd spoken 12 years earlier. These vows were forged in fire and failure and hard-won wisdom. Marcus had gone first, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. "Isla, 5 years ago I stood in front of 500 people and destroyed you for my own ambition. I called you broken when you were carrying our child. I chose legacy over love and lost everything that actually mattered." He'd paused, looking directly at her. "I can't undo that. Can't erase your pain or the years you spent alone or the trust I shattered. But I can promise you this: I will never again measure your worth by what you can produce. I will never prioritize what others think over what you need. I will never forget that being your husband is a privilege I have to earn every single day, not a right I'm entitled to. I promise to choose you when it's easy and when it's hard. I promise to be present for our daughter in all the small moments that matter. I promise to build a life based on who we actually are instead of who we're supposed to be. And I promise that if I ever start becoming the man I was before, you have my permission to leave, and know that I'll understand why. I love you, Isla, not despite our history, but because of it. Because the journey we took to get here, as painful as it was, made us both better. And I'm grateful every single day that you gave me another chance. Isla's vows had been equally powerful. Marcus, when you destroyed our marriage at that Christmas dinner, you destroyed who I was. The woman who trusted easily, who believed the best in people, who thought love was enough. That woman died, and I grieved her. But in her place, someone stronger emerged. Someone who knew her own worth. Someone who could survive alone. Someone who didn't need a man to complete her but chose partnership anyway. She'd reached for his hand. You didn't just change your circumstances to win me back. You changed who you fundamentally are. You traded wealth for honest work. You traded entitlement for humility. You traded performing for authenticity. And you did it without any guarantee that I'd ever forgive you. I'm marrying you today not because I've forgotten what you did, but because I've seen who you've become. Not because everything is perfect, but because we're both committed to doing the hard work of choosing each other daily. I promise to let go of the past while honoring what it taught us. I promise to risk my heart again, even though I know it could be broken. I promise to build this marriage as partners, equal in voice and value. And I promise to love you, not blindly, but with eyes wide open to both your strengths and your struggles. They'd kissed to cheers from their small gathering. Arya had demanded to be picked up so she could be part of the kiss, making everyone laugh. The reception was held at the community center, decorated with flowers from local gardens and food made by townspeople who'd become family. No ice sculptures or champagne fountains or designer dresses. Just real people celebrating real love that had survived real devastation. Jonas had given a toast that made everyone cry. I've known Marcus for 5 years now. Watched him go from soft-handed city boy who could barely lift a net to one of my best crew members. Watched him show up every single day at 4 in the morning, no matter how tired, no matter how hard. That's the kind of man you want in your life, the kind who shows up when it's difficult. Margaret had toasted Isla. This woman came to Brinewood broken and pregnant and alone. And she didn't just survive, she thrived. She built a community around her. She raised a beautiful daughter. She created art that makes people feel. And when the man who broke her showed up wanting another chance, she didn't make it easy. She made him earn it. That's strength. And Arya, not to be left out, had climbed on a chair and announced to everyone, my dada lives with us now and makes me pancakes and reads me stories. And he loves my mama very much, and they kissed, and I was there. The entire room had erupted in laughter and applause. That night, after the celebration ended and Arya was asleep at Margaret's house, for her first ever sleepover, Marcus and Isla had gone back to their cottage. Their home, the place where they'd rebuilt everything from ruins. They'd made love with the tenderness of people who understood how fragile and precious this second chance was. Who knew that trust, once broken, required constant maintenance. Who appreciated every moment because they'd both lived through the alternative. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Isla had said something that made Marcus's heart expand. I'm happy, genuinely, completely happy. Not despite what we went through, but because we went through it. Because it taught us what matters. Me too, Marcus had whispered. I lost an empire and found everything that actually matters. A year into their remarriage, Isla discovered she was pregnant again. She'd missed her period in October and taken a test in their bathroom, and when the 2 lines appeared, she'd stood there staring at it with complicated emotions. She was 40 now, not the 24-year-old who'd first fallen in love with Marcus, or even the 36-year-old who'd carried Arya alone. This pregnancy would be different, riskier, more challenging. but it was also wanted, deeply, completely wanted by both of them. She'd told Marcus that evening after Arya was in bed, showed him the test, and watched his face cycle through shock and joy and fear. "Are you okay with this?" he'd asked. "I know last time, everything around the pregnancy was terrible. If this brings up trauma, if it's too much, we can talk about options." Isla had pulled him close. "Last time I was pregnant alone and terrified and grieving my marriage. This time, I have a partner. A real partner who'll be there for every appointment, every milestone, every moment. This time is different because we're different. I want this baby, Marcus. I want to experience pregnancy with you actually present and supportive. Want to reclaim this experience from what it was before." The pregnancy was harder physically than Arya's had been. Isla was older, more tired, dealing with an active 6-year-old while growing another human. The morning sickness was worse. The exhaustion was profound. Her body ached in new ways, but Marcus was there for all of it. He held her hair when she was sick. He took over more of the parenting duties with Arya. He went to every single doctor's appointment, held her hand during every ultrasound, asked questions and took notes and made sure Isla felt supported. When they found out they were having a boy, Marcus had cried. A son. He was going to have a son. A boy he could teach and guide and love from the very beginning, not like with Arya, where he'd missed the first crucial year. They decided to name him Jonah Marcus. Jonah for Captain Jonas, the man who'd given Marcus a chance when no one else would. And Marcus because Isla insisted their son should carry his father's name, should know that his father had earned the right to pass on his legacy through transformation instead of entitlement. Arya was excited and terrified about becoming a big sister. She asked endless questions about babies and where they came from and whether the baby would like her. "The baby already loves you," Isla assured her. "You're going to be the best big sister. Will Dada love the baby more than me?" Arya had asked one night, her voice small and worried. Marcus had pulled her onto his lap. "Arya Quinn Hayes, I could never love anyone more than I love you. You're my first baby, my miracle. The daughter I didn't deserve, but got anyway. This baby boy is going to be so lucky to have you as a big sister, and I'm going to love you both completely, just in different ways. Promise? I promise. I promise on every star in the sky." Jonah was born on a warm June morning after a labor that was mercifully shorter than Arya's. 8 hours from first contraction to birth, and Marcus was there for every single second. He held Isla's hand when the contractions were terrible, breathed with her, reminded her how strong she was. And when Jonah finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Marcus cut the cord with shaking hands. "He's perfect," Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Isla, he's so perfect." They'd placed Jonah on Isla's chest, and she'd look down at her son with overwhelming love. "Hi, baby boy. Welcome to the world. Your big sister has been waiting to meet you." Marcus had taken a photograph of that moment. Isla exhausted and radiant, holding their newborn son, the morning lights streaming through the hospital window. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. They'd brought Jonah home 2 days later, and Arya had approached her baby brother with a mix of curiosity and caution. "He's so small," she'd whispered, staring at Jonah and his carrier. "Can I hold him?" Marcus had helped her sit on the couch and carefully placed Jonah in her arms, supporting his head. Arya had looked down at her baby brother with such fierce protective love that both Marcus and Isla had to blink back tears. "I'll take care of you," Arya had promised Jonah seriously. "I'll show you everything, and if anyone is mean to you, I'll tell Dada and he'll fix it." The first weeks with a newborn while parenting a 6-year-old were chaos. Beautiful, exhausting chaos. Jonah needed to eat constantly. Arya needed attention and reassurance that she was still loved. Marcus was trying to balance work with being present. Isla was healing and navigating breastfeeding and running on almost no sleep. But they managed it together. Marcus took night feedings when Jonah would take a bottle, letting Isla sleep. Arya helped with small tasks, bringing diapers or singing to Jonah when he cried. The community rallied again, bringing meals and offering babysitting and supporting them through the adjustment. And gradually, they found their rhythm as a family of 4. If you're still with me, If this story has touched something deep in your heart, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like, share this video with someone who needs to hear that transformation is possible, that broken things can be healed, that second chances, when earned through real change, can lead to something more beautiful than the original ever was. Comment below and tell me what you're feeling right now. Tell me if you believe in redemption. Tell me where you're watching from, or just say, I'm with you, Dr. Phillips, because we're almost at the end of this journey, but the most important moment is still ahead. The moment when Arya asks the question that every child of divorce or separation eventually asks, and the answer Marcus gives will show us whether this transformation is complete. Let's continue. Arya's 7th birthday party was held at the cottage on a perfect summer day. The backyard was decorated with streamers and balloons. A dozen of her friends from school ran wild on the beach. Jonah, now 1 year old, toddled after the bigger kids with determination. Marcus stood at the grill making hamburgers and hot dogs, while Isla organized party games. They moved around each other with practiced ease, the choreography of partners who knew each other completely. Margaret and Jonas and Lorraine and all the Brinewood family were there. The community that had witnessed every stage of this transformation, that had protected Isla when she needed it, and given Marcus a chance when he probably didn't deserve it. After cake and presents, as the party was winding down and kids were being picked up by parents, Arya had climbed into Marcus's lap while he sat in one of the lawn chairs. Dada, I have a question. Marcus had wrapped his arms around his daughter. Ask me anything, sweetheart. Arya had been quiet for a moment, gathering her courage. Why weren't you there when I was born? The backyard had gone silent. Isla had frozen in the middle of collecting plates. Margaret and Jonas had exchanged glances. Everyone understood that this was the moment that mattered, the question that had always been coming. Marcus had looked at Isla over Arya's head. She'd given him a small nod. Permission to tell the truth. That's a big question, honey, and it deserves an honest answer. Can we sit somewhere quiet and talk about it? They'd gone to the porch swing, just Marcus and Arya, while Isla stayed, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give them privacy. Marcus had settled Arya on his lap and taken a deep breath. When your mama was pregnant with you, I made terrible mistakes. I hurt her very badly. I said cruel things and made choices that weren't kind, and because I hurt her so much, she had to leave to keep both of you safe. Arya had looked up at him with those solemn gray eyes that matched his own. What kind of cruel things? I told her she wasn't good enough. I made her feel worthless. And I did it in front of lots of people, which made it even worse. Marcus felt tears threatening. Your mama is one of the strongest, most amazing people I've ever known, and I treated her like she didn't matter. So she left, and she was right to leave. Did you love me then? Arya had asked, her voice small. I didn't know about you yet. If I had known, it wouldn't have changed what I did wrong, but I would have been devastated to miss you. When I finally found out about you, when I finally got to meet you, you were already 6 months old, and I had already missed so much. Arya had thought about this seriously. But you're here now. Yes, I'm here now, because I spent a long time learning how to be better, learning that being your dada is the most important thing I'll ever do, learning that family isn't about money or big houses or impressing people. It's about showing up every single day and loving the people who matter. Marcus had tightened his arms around her. I can't change the fact that I missed your birth and your first smile and your first steps. I'll always be sad about that, but I can promise you that I'll be here for everything from now on. Every birthday, every school play, every scraped knee, every triumph, every challenge. I'm here, Arya, and I'm not going anywhere ever again. Will you always choose us? Arya had asked. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's what real love means, sweetheart. Not loving someone when it's easy and convenient, but choosing them when it's difficult. Choosing to be better even when it would be easier to stay the same. He'd looked over at Isla, who was crying silently while pretending to clean up. Choosing your mama and you and Jonah every single day, even when I'm tired or frustrated or scared. That's what being a husband and a father means. Arya had wrapped her small arms around his neck. I'm glad you learned to be better, Dada. I'm glad you're here now. Me too, baby girl. Me too. She'd pulled back to look at him very seriously. If you ever forget how to be better, Mama and me will remind you. Okay? Marcus had laughed through his tears. Okay. That's a deal. They'd sat on that porch swing for a long time, Marcus holding his daughter, both of them watching the ocean. And Marcus had understood that this moment, this honest conversation about his failures and his transformation, was worth more than any empire he'd ever built. Because Arya knew the truth now, knew her father wasn't perfect, knew he'd made terrible mistakes, but also knew that he'd done the hard work of changing, that he'd chosen them, that he was here and committed and never leaving. That night, after both children were asleep and the cottage was quiet, Isla had found Marcus on the porch, staring out at the darkness. She'd sat beside him and taken his hand. You handled that beautifully. You told her the truth without making excuses. You owned what you did without burdening her with details she's too young for. I'm proud of you. Marcus had pulled her close. I meant every word. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure our children know they're valuable for who they are, not what they achieve. Making sure they understand that mistakes can be redeemed if you're willing to do the work. They'd sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Isla had said something that made Marcus's heart expand even further. I want to tell you something I've never said out loud. When you first showed up in Brinewood, when you refused to leave even though I told you to, I was so angry. I wanted you to suffer. Wanted you to feel powerless and rejected and worthless the way I felt at that Christmas dinner. She'd paused, gathering her thoughts. But watching you transform, watching you become someone genuinely different instead of just performing change to win me back, that healed something in me. It showed me that people really can change if they want it badly enough. That redemption is real. That second chances, when truly earned, can lead to something more beautiful than the first chance ever was. Marcus had turned to look at her, seeing the woman he'd almost lost forever, the woman who'd survived his worst and given him her best. Our first marriage was based on illusions, Isla had continued. We thought we knew what we wanted, but we were just performing roles. This marriage is based on truth, on seeing each other clearly, flaws and all, and choosing each other anyway. And that's so much stronger. I love you, Marcus had said. I love you in ways I didn't understand were possible when we first married. I love you for your strength and your vulnerability, for your willingness to risk your heart again, for being the most incredible mother our children could ask for giving me a second chance I absolutely didn't deserve. I love you too, Isla had answered. I love who you've become. I love watching you with our children. I love the life we've built from the ashes of what we destroyed. I love that we know now what really matters. They'd kissed under the stars, these two people who'd lost each other completely and found their way back to something more real. The years that followed were filled with ordinary magic. Marcus continued working with Jonas, eventually becoming a full partner in the fishing operation. It didn't make them rich, but it provided enough. And more importantly, it gave Marcus purpose and connection to a community. Isla's art program expanded to serve 3 neighboring towns. She mentored young artists, taught workshops, created installations for public spaces. Her work was shown in regional galleries, and while she never returned to the Manhattan art scene, she was respected and valued for her contributions. Arya grew into a thoughtful, creative child who loved books and the ocean and her little brother. She excelled in school, not because she was pushed to achieve, but because she was naturally curious. She knew her father had made terrible mistakes before she was born, but she also knew he'd spent years becoming someone worthy of being her dad. Jonah was fearless and joyful, always laughing, always moving. He adored his big sister and followed her everywhere. He had Marcus's gray eyes and Isla's artistic talent and a personality entirely his own. And Marcus and Isla built a marriage that was tested and proven. They still fought sometimes, still had hard days, still struggled with money and parenting challenges and life's inevitable difficulties. But they faced everything together with honesty and commitment and the hard-won wisdom that came from having lost each other once and refused to lose each other again. On their 10-year anniversary, not of their first marriage, but of their Remarriage in Brinewood. They renewed their vows one more time. Just the four of them on the beach at sunset. No witnesses except the ocean and the sky. Arya and Jonah stood beside them, while Marcus and Isla promised, again, to choose each other every day, to value people over prestige, to measure success by love instead of achievement, to remember always what they'd survived and what they'd built from the ruins. That night, putting the children to bed together, Arya had asked a question that showed how much she'd grown. Dada, do you ever miss being rich? Having lots of money and a big house and all those things you had before? Marcus had thought about it seriously, giving her question the respect it deserved. Sometimes I miss the comfort of not worrying about money, but I don't miss who I was when I had all those things. That Marcus was lonely and disconnected and didn't understand what mattered. This Marcus, the one who works with his hands and comes home tired and has paint on his shirts from your art projects and never gets enough sleep because your brother wakes up early. This Marcus is happy in ways that Marcus never was. What about you, Mama? Arya had turned to Isla. Do you miss your old life? Isla had smiled. I miss the financial security sometimes, but I don't miss performing for people who didn't really know me. I don't miss feeling invisible in my own life. This life, where I'm valued for who I am and what I contribute, where I have genuine community and partnership. This is the life I always wanted without knowing it. So you're both glad everything happened? Arya had asked. Even the bad parts? Marcus and Isla had exchanged glances, having this entire conversation in silence the way long married couples can. Not glad exactly, Marcus had answered carefully. I'll always regret the pain I caused your mama. Always wish I'd been there when you were born. Always carry the knowledge that I hurt people I loved because I was selfish and foolish. Those regrets don't go away. But, Isla had continued, we're grateful for what we learned, for who we became because of what we survived. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us teach us the most important lessons. Sometimes we have to lose everything to discover what we actually need. Jonah, who was supposed to be sleeping but was clearly listening, had piped up from his bed. I'm glad you found each other again. 'Cause then you had me. Everyone had laughed, and the serious moment had dissolved into tickles and giggles and the beautiful chaos of family. Later, much later, after the children were finally asleep and the cottage was quiet, Marcus had stood at the window, looking out at the ocean that had witnessed his transformation. Isla had joined him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. What are you thinking about? She'd asked. How far we've come. How a decade ago, I stood in a ballroom and destroyed everything that mattered because I thought legacy was about bloodlines and empires. And now I understand that legacy is this. It's Arya knowing that people can change. It's Jonah growing up in a home where love is demonstrated through daily choices. It's you being happy and fulfilled and valued. It's having a community that knows us and supports us. That's the legacy that matters. Isla had tightened her arms around him. You know what I think about sometimes? That envelope I left on the podium at the Christmas dinner. The medical report that told you I was pregnant. I think about how that single piece of paper changed everything. If you hadn't left it, I might never have looked for you, Marcus had said. Might never have understood what I'd lost. And I might never have forgiven you. Might have raised Arya completely alone. Might have let my anger define me forever. Isla had rested her head against his back. That envelope was the last thing I did as your wife before becoming something else entirely, and somehow it became the first step toward finding our way back to each other. They'd stood like that for a long time, holding each other, grateful for the journey that had brought them here. And in the morning, Marcus would wake up at 4 to go fishing with Jonas. Isla would get the kids ready for school and summer camp. They'd have breakfast together, all four of them crowded around the small kitchen table. They'd navigate the beautiful, ordinary chaos of family life, because that was the real happy ending. Not a grand gesture or a perfect moment, but the daily choice to show up, to love, to choose each other, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Marcus Montgomery had lost an empire and found everything that actually mattered, had been shattered and rebuilt into someone better, had learned the hardest way possible that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars or properties or social status. True wealth was this: a cottage overlooking the ocean, a partner who knew his worst and loved him anyway, Two children who would grow up understanding that people's worth wasn't determined by what they produced. A community that valued contribution over wealth. A life built on truth instead of illusions. And as Marcus watched the sun rise over the Atlantic, painting the sky in colors that Isla would try to capture in her next painting, he understood that he was the richest man alive. Not because of what he had, but because of who he'd become, and who he chose to love, every single day. Now, before you go, I want to hear from you. What's your biggest takeaway? What moment hit you the hardest? Do you believe Marcus truly changed, or will he always carry the stain of what he did at that Christmas dinner? Comment below. Tell me everything you're feeling. And please, tell me where in the world you're watching from. Are you in a small coastal town like Brinewood? A big city? Somewhere in between? I want to know. And listen, if this story touched you, if it made you feel something real, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button. Second, subscribe to Love and Twilights with Dr. Phillips, because we're just getting started. I have so many more stories to tell you. Third, share this video. Send it to someone who needs to hear that change is possible. This is Dr. Phillips, reminding you that sometimes we have to lose everything to find what we actually need. That broken things can be made whole. That redemption is real. And that love, real love, is worth fighting for. Until next time, choose wisely, love deeply, and remember that every day is a chance to become someone worthy of the life you're building. I'm with you, and I hope you're with me too, and I'll see you in the next story. God bless you all.